Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome back once again to Radio Free Magonia, the official podcast of the Magonia Research Group. I'm your host, Tom Goodwin, and with me as always is not Michael Parrish. I have no idea where he could have gone. Oh well, today is the first time I am hosting one of these shows completely solo. My guest tonight is the amazing Jordan Smith. Tell us a bit about yourself, Jordan, but obviously within the bounds of your anonymity.
My name's Jordan. I live in the Midwest of America. I'm 33 years old. Married, have one kid. He's 11. I'm not all that interesting. I don't really get up to much.
It's okay. So what is it? What is it that drew you into the world of the strange? And could you give us basically, this is the point now where I'm going to ask you to give us a history of your experiences and kind of walk us through the bizarre happenings that have taken place in your life through kind of normally in a chronological order. So take it away.
I became interested in the paranormal from like a very, very young age. My parents, on both sides, my parents split when I was young, and they had split custody, and my dad and my mom were always moving. Mom in particular never stayed in one place more than a year, but the one place that was a constant throughout my whole life was my grandma and grandpa's house. Grandpa bought the house sometime in the 60s, I think, and grandma and grandpa have since passed, but my dad still lives there. But when I was very young, grandpa would always tell me stories, trying to scare me, I guess, or just playing games. He'd say, "Oh, there's ghosts in the basement. Don't go down in the basement." And I think really that's because grandpa just wanted to go down there and watch TV and didn't want me interrupting him, But a lot of the experiences I had were in that house because I grew up there mostly. I spent my weekends there quite a bit. I spent the summers off from school there. And I actually lived there for 2 years, I think.
Okay.
But the very first weird memory that I have from the house, I was probably 10-ish, I guess. And my cousin was over, and we were playing around, and I ran towards the basement. I think we were playing tag or something. And as soon as I got into the basement, the door slammed behind me and all the lights shut off.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I turned around and I was trying to open the door, and my cousin was yelling at me to open the door, like not to keep him locked out. So, both of us were trying to open the door and we didn't get it open. And, that lasted just a couple minutes, really. But that's the first memory I really have of something strange happening in the house.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That must have been terrifying.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that sort of thing. And also it's kind of like it's interesting that a lot of the stuff did happen in the basement. And it's like, do you think that your grandpa was just telling you stories to scare you, or do you think that perhaps he knew that there was something in the basement, so to speak?
Well, I honestly don't know, because Grandpa almost never talked about it other than him. He told me one story, and I will get to that. But other than that, he wouldn't talk about it. And Grandma was kind of the same way. She was a very prim and proper Christian lady, and she didn't want to talk about it. The only thing she would say is the only ghost there is the Holy Ghost, and things like that. I got her to mention it 2 or 3 times, but other than that, neither one of them would really discuss it. I think it was something that was just kind of accepted and lived with in the house.
Yeah.
And weird as it sounds, I was more or less the same way. I didn't talk about it with them. I would discuss it with like my friends or people that came with the house, or much more now that I'm older. because I tell all these stories to anybody that'll listen to me for a couple seconds, but they'll
Yeah.
always ask me is like, oh well, what did grandma say, what did grandpa say, and the real answer is, well, I didn't really talk to him about it almost
Mm.
ever. So
Yeah. I guess that kind of like you said about the kind of just accepting it as just a part of the house. I guess that
yeah.
if you spend long enough in these sorts of houses, if like the activity isn't particularly kind of aggressive, so to speak, it's just kind of becomes a thing that happens, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
And yeah, so continue with the experiences.
Okay. So I was probably, I don't know, somewhere around 10 when that happened.
Hmm?
The next one that sticks out to me, I was 12 or 13. And at that time, when I would stay, I would sleep on the couch in the living room. They have bedrooms, but up until I was a teenager, I always just slept on the couch, I guess.
Mm.
But it was only me and Grandpa in the house because Grandma every year would go on missions trips to Mexico. So it was just the two of us. And one of the last things that Grandpa would always do before going to bed was do the dishes. He wouldn't do them after dinner, but he would not let them sit overnight. So he finished up the dishes, put everything away in its place, closed all the cabinets, and went to bed. And I'd say, not even 10 minutes later, we heard a crash coming from the kitchen. And the couch where I was sleeping, there's one wall that separates the kitchen and the living room. So I was just on the other side of the wall. So both of us got up in there and we found like a broken cup.
Huh.
And it was in four perfect pieces on different ends of the room. Now, the kitchen has a weird layout. If you imagine a capital letter L,
Okay.
and that's sort of the shape of the kitchen, and the bottom or the leg of the L, there's the dining room table.
Okay.
So where the cabinet was right there in front of the table. There was one piece of the cup on the cabinet, one piece in the sink, one piece at the very top around the corner, and one piece on the opposite counter around the corner.
Wow.
Yeah, so and like all the cabinets were still closed, and Grandpa was very big on putting everything away, very neat. Everything goes in its place, and he didn't have much to say about it. He probably just assumed I did it, but I just thought it was so strange that a cup would fall and break and go into four perfect pieces, and they
Yeah.
would be as far away as they can possibly get from each other,
Yeah.
and
I've
in places where yeah,
Oh no,
they
continue.
couldn't
Sorry.
possibly be. I'm very sorry.
No, no, no.
In
It's okay.
places where
I'm
they
sorry.
couldn't possibly be. Yeah.
Mm. Huh. Yeah, I've read a lot about kind of like trends in kind of poltergeist encounters and cases like that, and like the kitchen does seem to often be a focal point for these sorts of things, which is weird.
Mhm.
But I think that it kind of becomes less weird when you think about it in the context of like kind of what the same sorts of things might have been called in like hundreds of years ago, for example. And
Uh-huh.
so in Scottish folklore, you have a household spirit called the brownie, and these creatures would basically kind of obsessively clean things or break things and hurl things around invisibly. So they sound very much like a poltergeist. And these kind of legends of household spirits are found literally all over the world, and they're often associated with the kitchen. They're often associated with the stove specifically. And so it really doesn't surprise me that the poltergeist or what we call a poltergeist at least was active in the kitchen. Um, the the way that your grandpa had a kind of routine, and this thing basically kind of seemingly went out of its way to upturn that to an
Uh-huh.
extent is also definitely very much a thing. So there's I believe it's a case from southeast England, the Black Monk of Pontefract, which is another poltergeist
I've heard of
case,
him.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so the mum in this house was very much also a neat freak, and so this entity would, I think it got to the point where it would literally just smear jam on the door handles and
Oh.
things, and it's just like the kind of mischievous kind of like subversion of the kind of normal routine is very much a poltergeist thing. And so yeah, tell me more about this house. This is fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all right.
Um, like I said, I was there most of my life. Well, not most of my life, but most of my young life, right? At one point, I think I was 16 or something, and I got in a fight with my stepmom, and I was kicked out of the house. I spent like a very, very brief time homeless, and then grandma and grandpa found me, and I moved in with them. So I lived there for two years, something like that, and that is when I was actually living there and there every single day is when things kind of started ramping up, or maybe it was just that I noticed them more. So grandpa passed away in 2006, and as I mentioned, grandma every year would go with her church to Mexico. So this time I was in the house by myself, and I was upstairs in the library. We had like a library slash computer room, and it shared a vent with my bedroom, which was directly underneath it. So I was on the computer, I was playing The Sims or something, and I started hearing these weird noises coming through the vent, and I
Hmm.
stopped and turned off the computer and everything to see if I can figure out what the noises are, and it sounded like voices coming through the vent. And I was like, what's going on? This is crazy. And the voices started getting louder. I would hear different voices, and they would change a lot. And finally, I heard what sounded like a laugh track from a TV sitcom, and I realized the TV is on, is what I'm hearing, and it's flipping through channels.
Hmm.
So I was scared. I thought somebody had gotten into the house somehow, and I hadn't noticed it
Yeah.
because there are outside stairs that lead down into the basement. I don't think anybody could have opened that door without me knowing, but when you're hearing all this, what's the explanation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the first place
So
your mind jumps to.
yeah. And so I got on the phone and I called one of my friends just to have you know somebody kind of with me as I'm experiencing this, and I grabbed a knife and I went down to the basement and I was looking around, and of course there's nobody down there. And by the time I'm walking down the hall to my bedroom, the TV is already off.
Hmm.
But aside from this happening to begin with, there's two things that are strange about this. One, the TV wasn't plugged in because
Ah.
I had been messing with it earlier in that day trying to get the PlayStation to work. And the other point is that it wasn't hooked up to the cable, and it didn't get channels. I only had it in my room because it was hooked up to my PlayStation. The only reason I had it was to play games.
Oh, that's really
So the
strange.
Yeah, so the TV that didn't get any signal and wasn't plugged in had somehow come on and was flipping through channels, and like the sound was carrying up through the vents into me upstairs.
Wow.
So I
Yeah.
think at that point I was scared enough that I left the house.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, I can imagine. The again, like the kind of, so as you can probably tell from my input on this, I've done a lot of research into like kind of commonalities between different cases.
uh-huh.
And like TV shenanigans, so to speak, are they do happen. There are cases. There's a really interesting little kind of sub branch of cases where where sometimes even unplugged, but a TV kind of suddenly seems to work like a video call, and you just suddenly people suddenly report just seeing other people on their
Oh.
TV, look just as confused as they are, just looking through the TV at them.
Oh, I don't like
Obviously,
that.
yeah, no, I don't like that either. And there are of course there are other cases with involving UFOs, such as there was over a again, I can't remember where this was or when this was. I just remember that it happened allegedly, with a small American town, and like the power went out, and people started saying that they were seeing a silvery object over the town. And when the power came back on, all the TVs that were on showed basically showed footage of a nuclear explosion,
Oh,
it's like that sounds unbelievable, but in the kind of context of all the other cases I know of this sort of stuff, it kind of it rings more true than it might. And with like so basically what I'm trying to say here is that it's not out of the kind of behavior pattern of strangeness in general to mess with the TV, basically. And it's really I wonder, like, even like from a kind of scientific perspective, I wonder how it works. Like, I wonder how that takes place.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, no, no.
Continue with your continue with the stories.
Well, yeah, as long as there was two other events, like big events that happened, like specifically in the bedroom.
Okay.
Um, I've always, like, since I was a kid, I just like my bed up against the wall. I like it. It's comfortable. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there was a time I was in the bed. I was laying as close as I could get to the wall. My nose was physically touching the wall, and the bed was behind me. And I was talking on the phone to the girl I was dating at the time,
Mhm.
and the center of the bed slowly depressed, like it as if someone had sat down on the bed and laid down next to me. And it kind of stayed down like that for, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. Then,
Mm.
just as slowly as it had gone down, it went back up, like whoever or whatever had sat itself down in the bed had just gotten back up.
Ooh. Yeah. That is again kind of the yeah. That is really strange. It's like it's really interesting how, like, these things are sometimes seem to have mass and sometimes don't. And so it's like that sort of encounter, you'd kind of suspect that there was something physically there and that it was invisible somehow. Whereas
Yeah,
other encounters where these things are able to lift things up over people's heads without physically moving the person, and it's like it seems that they follow. It's almost as if the rules they follow change. I mean,
yeah, depending on what they want to do at the time.
yeah, yeah, which is really interesting, and it's like, yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention them lifting things, because that was the other bed incident, as I refer to it, I guess.
okay,
But I woke up in the middle of the night, and I don't know if, I mean, everyone has woken up abruptly from, like, a very deep
yeah,
sleep, like the middle of your REM cycle, and you're just confused. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
yeah,
Well, that happened to me at one point, and it took me, I don't know, a minute or two to realize why I had woken up. And it's because my bed was violently shaking back and forth. Like nothing else in the room was. It was just the bed. And I, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, should I be scared of this? No, I'm too tired. And then I went back to sleep. And I didn't think about how weird it was, that whole situation, until, like, the next morning. I recalled it. I was eating my breakfast, and I'm like, this incredibly strange thing happened.
yeah.
Like something woke me up, shaking my bed.
Yeah.
So
Again, it's like so bed shaking is it's classic. It's a very common trope that you see in these sorts of encounters, and even to the point where it's been depicted famously in fiction in the Exorcist movie.
hmm
And it's like again such a thing. I believe it's been spoken about in it's been spoken about in legends of these sorts of things from ranging from Britain to Japan. The kind of the meddling with the bed in general is it seems to be a favorite pastime of poltergeist, so
yeah,
to speak. And
kind of rude, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, it's like I guess it's partially because the kind of bed and the bedroom feels like a kind of safe space,
Mm-hmm.
and so then it's like
The
kind of just
subversion of that.
yeah, yeah, and so then kind of like screwing with that feels like a yeah, like so one of the experiences I've had myself. So I've had uh, I know that I'm the host here and I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I'm going to kind
No,
of
no, no. I'm
add something here,
absolutely. I want to hear it.
my own canon of experiences, which is that like I've had weird experiences before, and I've normally kind of been able to deal with them pretty easily, as in been able to kind of comprehend and kind of deal with them without getting particularly frightened. And
Mm-hmm.
then one night I was alone in the house. I was quite young at the time, and I heard a and so it was 1:15 in the morning, and so I was trying to get to sleep, and I knew that my younger brother had a school trip in the morning, but he'd need to leave for that at 2:30. So I was trying to get to sleep basically before my parents got home and before my brother left the house, and then I started hearing footsteps, almost coming up the stairs to my room, and so I assumed, okay, my parents have gotten home, and so I just need to stay quiet, and then I heard the footsteps. My door didn't open or anything, but I started hearing the footsteps in my room, and this was so imagine like a really big dog walking on the floor, so walking on the floor with like its claws, and I could
Okay.
hear the claws kind of sticking into the carpet back up, and then I started hearing things being moved around on my desk, and like at this point I basically just got my eyes screwed shut, and I'm just kind of thinking, whatever you are, please go away. And and eventually I say out loud, I don't want to see you when I turn on this light. And I turn on the light. There's nothing there, of course. And but it's like, and nothing's been moved on my desk either. And so it's like
Wow.
it was an entirely auditory experience. And like, I obviously want to clarify that I wasn't like in between waking and sleeping. I'd literally just turned off the light, and then this suddenly started happening.
Yeah.
And it's like the feeling again, like the feeling of violation from that
Yes.
was massive. It's like whatever that thing was, it shouldn't have been in my bedroom. I got that feeling. It was not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really odd. I actually no, I'll mention this. I'll mention this later when we get onto the Whispers estate,
Okay.
because there's something which I drew connection between. But continue.
Uh, it, just sort of like a little side note, like you mentioned, like I don't want to see you when I turn on the light. It's fascinating to me, like in as many stories as I've heard about this kind of phenomena,
Hmm?
how most of the time, simply by telling it to knock it off or,
Yeah.
stop doing that or you're scaring me, it will actually stop.
Yes.
I find that like very fascinating because I've seen like a bunch of different stories I've read of you've gotten whatever it is to stop just by politely asking it or getting kind of angry with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now uh no, I'm saving that for later. But basically, have you read any of the books by John Keel, like the Mothman prophecies and that sort of thing?
My I have not. My wife just finished Mothman
Hmm.
Prophecies like a month or so ago. I have not.
Yeah. So what I was what I was gonna say with that is that like it's really interesting the way that so something which I thought of as soon as I heard about the kind of scary stories that your grandpa used to tell you about the basement, and then of course the basement actually turned out to be haunted, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how kind of our expectations and our kind of intentions, or our kind of no, I'd say our expectations kind of play out or are
Yeah.
played out by these things. And so it's
Hmm.
like you must have thought that the basement was haunted, and then the basement was haunted.
Yeah.
And it's like another reason why I bring up John Keel in this context is because he's one of the people who kind of pioneered in the field of bringing kind of the UFO subject into the kind of paranormal, as opposed to assuming that it was extraterrestrials from space. And rather saying that like the idea of it being extraterrestrial doesn't quite fit. And like think about it scientifically, it doesn't, like the behaviors exhibited by so-called extraterrestrials just doesn't work. There's no reason for a scientifically advanced civilization to take people out of their beds at night and like perform brutal surgical experiments on them when
Right. Yeah.
we don't even need to do that at our level of advancement. We can use things like anesthetic, and if we were advanced enough to be able to travel from other star systems, I imagine we would have nanotechnology and things.
Mhm.
And it's like, and the same goes for cattle mutilations. There's no justification for it outside of just pure sadism. And why travel for thousands of light years and then just kill a cow and then leave? It's like,
Yeah, it seems not worth it.
yeah, it doesn't make sense. And so what John Keel said was that or what authors like John Keel and Jacques Vallée have postulated is that like these extraterrestrials are just as quote supernatural as things like ghosts. And not to say they are the spirits of the dead, of course, but that they come from wherever it is that poltergeists come from and all of that. And the reason why I've gone on this long tangent now is because I was going to bring up with cases of attempted alien abductions in which the victim basically gets angry and refuses to allow himself to be taken.
Huh.
And there are cases where that works, where it just stops the scenario completely. And also, again, playing out with the kind of cultural expectations of these things. There are cases in which calling out the name of the god that the person believes in, regardless of what that god actually is, will again stop it. And so it's really interesting to me to see the kind of psychological and kind of cultural aspects of these things, and like how that plays out in accounts.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
But yes. Anyway, sorry to once again go on a long tangent.
No.
So continue with your tales.
Okay. Uh, um, I only ever actually saw something one time. I was getting ready to leave the. Pardon me.
Okay.
I was getting ready to leave the house, and I was packing things up from my room to my car, and I was walking up and down the stairs to the basement quite a bit. And Grandma had a cat,
Okay.
and normally you would not even know that there was a cat because the cat, it would hide from me. It was very docile, lazy, skittish,
Yep.
all of the above. But I noticed as I was walking up and down that the cat was absolutely losing its mind, which isn't that weird for a cat necessarily, but it was running back and forth and jumping out the window and yowling and hissing. And I went to go see what it was doing because there was like the patio window. And I went to go check it out because it struck me as weird that that particular cat was doing it. And I looked outside, and what it was jumping at was there was probably about the size of a tennis ball, a ball of light, and it was around my chest level. And as I looked at it, it very slowly floated downward in a Z pattern. And then it shot right back up to where it was originally, quick as you like, and then right around the side of the house, it disappeared. And I ran outside to go see if I could see it or figure out what it was, but it was gone. And this was actually like in the middle of the day. It wasn't the nighttime. There wasn't anything, spooky going on or anything like that. It was just a bright ball of light in the middle of the day floating around outside the window. And I like that it wasn't just me. Like the cat noticed it, obviously, whatever it was. So
yeah,
it gives you a little bit of validation.
Indeed, it does.
If only a little.
Random question: what color was it?
Yellowish, like a yellow white.
Okay. Yeah, I was I don't have anything specific to say about like the color of orbs, but the but if you said it was blue, I would have linked it to like the kind of the weirdness on Skinwalker Ranch, which you might have
Yeah,
heard of.
I have.
With these
Yes.
with these so-called blue meanies, basically just making absolute terrors of themselves. But in the context of kind of flying lights, of course, I'm going to briefly bring it back to UFOs, and
Sure.
say that the UFO witnessed in 2004 over the coast of South Carolina by Commander David Trevor was described as departing from the scene like a bullet from a gun. So again, like the kind of inertia braking, like kind of really
Yes.
slow movement or even stationary, followed by immediate extreme speed.
That's
And
exactly what it was. Yeah.
yeah, and interestingly enough, that exact terminology, like a bullet from a gun, was used by one John Barclay of Rockland, Texas, to describe the exit of an enormous airship he encountered on April 22nd of 1897.
Oh wow.
And so it's like these things may change appearance, but they don't change behavior necessarily, so to speak. I keep saying that. The so it's like these things like with how I keep bringing it back to folklore as well. The people people give these things different names, people characterize these things in different ways, but if you look at them just from a kind of behavioral point of view, you see that like there's a lot of commonality between all of this stuff.
Mhm.
And it does kind of suggest that all these mysteries that people would normally think of as very separate very much feed into each other. And during the if I'm not mistaken, during the Enfield poltergeist haunting case, which took place in the 60s or the 70s, I think. The one of the so poltergeist cases, you may or may not know this, but like poltergeists normally tend to focus in on they normally can kind of latch themselves to a teenage girl, basically.
I have heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the teenage girl in this case, she reported here again, if I remember correctly, she reported seeing a kind of strange orb like light which would follow her around. And so it's like and one more thing about orbs. I am people often ask me about orbs, and so I'm saying that like when they're caught on when they're caught on camera, they're normally just dust in the lens.
Hmm.
And so so all the kind of if you search up orbs on the internet, all the photos you'll find, or most of them at least, will be just dust illuminated by the lens. But it is so orbs are much rarer than you might think, judging by all those photographs. But it is always intriguing to me when there are cases of people actually seeing them with the naked eye. And so yeah, that's fascinating. Again, I haven't like and seeing them in broad daylight is even stranger. Um, yeah. So was the light like kind of self-contained? So did it was it self-contained to the sphere, or did it kind of shine out, so to speak?
It, I would say it was more self-contained. Like,
Mm,
I mean, it's a little bit harder to tell because it was the daylight,
yeah.
and I was looking at it instead of anything around it, but it didn't seem like it was uh, radiating light, I
Yeah.
guess, or
Yeah.
emitting light.
Hmm.
It just seemed like it was light, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That does definitely. Yeah. Yeah. The Yes, I remember I had an experience, a similar experience, which I'll get onto later, I imagine, in which the light of this thing, just stayed within the circle, so to
Uh
speak,
huh.
which is again really odd. Um,
Yes.
and so that's always really intriguing to me when people describe that. Um, any more stories from your grandparents' house?
Quite a few.
Wonderful.
Uh, what I mentioned, like the cat seeing it, giving me, some sort of validation, but it wasn't just the cat. It was any person who spent a significant amount of time in that house had their own experience. And that's one of the things that, like, I do kind of appreciate about it in a weird way. Not to say I'm glad everybody had creepy experiences, but it says like, okay, whatever this may be, whether it's ghosts or psychic phenomena or
Mm,
something else, it's not just me imagining it.
yeah.
So the girl I was dating at the time, she one evening had a family emergency and she couldn't she had to give up the bed at her house, and so like, okay, you can stay over here.
Yeah.
But obviously grandma was not going to let two teenagers stay the night in the bed together.
Yeah.
That's Grandma wasn't having it.
Yes.
So she slept upstairs in what was my grandpa's old room, because grandma and grandpa had separate bedrooms.
Mm,
And when I got up in the morning, she was gone, and I called her and asked her what was happening, and said she left in the middle of the night because she was laying in the bed and she couldn't sleep. It was storming, strange bed, couldn't get to sleep. And she rolled over at one point, and Grandpa had like a bureau with a large mirror or
mhm.
vanity, I guess. I don't know what the right word is, sitting next to the bed. And she said she opened her eyes and looked, and in the mirror, she saw a man standing behind her looking down at her.
Hmm.
And the way she described the man, it was my grandpa, from the perfect, physical appearance
Huh.
down to kind of the mannerisms, because she said like he looked angry, and grandpa kind of did. He just had a stern face. He was not like an angry or stern person, but he just kind of looked that way, and he was standing sort of at an military at ease
Mhm.
formation, because grandpa he was in World War II and the Korean conflict, so he had like a lot of time in the military. He was just he had a habit of just standing like that, and so she said she had seen that, and like it scared her enough that she left the house. So, oh, by the way, I guess I should also mention she never met my grandpa.
Huh. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is your view on what ghosts are? So do you think that she encountered the actual literal spirit of your grandpa, or do you think that like it was a kind of, do you know the kind of stone tape theory? So like kind of that,
Yeah, yeah, just a memory of the house,
yeah, yeah,
something
so to
like that.
speak. What do you think?
I don't know. I fall in between something like that.
Yeah.
There's obviously, I think there's both. I think there's residual hauntings, which is just some event playing itself over and over,
Yes.
and then there's things that can interact or be interacted with. And
Certainly.
I'm not
Yes.
necessarily sure what this was. I don't know that ghosts are the spirits of the restless dead. I, I, I don't know that. What
Yeah. Me neither.
But they say that energy can't be created or destroyed, so what happens to us after
Yes.
our bodies pass? What makes the pile of meat and bones, what makes it into a person?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what is the soul? What energy is that? What happens to it when you're gone?
Yes.
Maybe it's still kind of around.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Certainly. I
Uh-huh.
I have like a kind of, again, I have a kind of a bit of a dilemma here with what I believe on this, because I think that like the stone tape theory definitely makes a decent deal of sense for places where like vast amounts of chaos and trauma have taken place. So, for example, the Battle of Gettysburg,
Hmm.
and like the Gettysburg is infamously haunted, and we had a guest on this podcast a few months back who had some really strange experiences on the battlefield. Um, and but then also we know that or from the writings of John Keel and all of that, which like my co so the other members of the Magonia research group, which obviously this is the official podcast of said Magonia research group, their research is very much based around the ideas of John Keel and Jacques Vallée, and so they would hold that a ghost is not necessarily the spirit of the deceased and is instead like some entity, a kind of non-local consciousness, so to speak, like kind of imitating that person. And
Sure.
I think
I
in
believe that too.
yeah, I think in in some cases, certainly, but but also like looking at like accounts of like near-death experiences, and I I think there is something to the concept of human consciousness not necessarily disappearing when we die.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's like just wishful thinking, but like based on, so there's an account from a soldier in, I think it was either World War II or World War One, but he he woke up. He woke up in his bed, and basically just got out of bed, had a walk around his room, left the and then looked back in his bed and saw that his body was in the bed, and that he and then like people obviously got notified that he had died overnight, and so he watched as like nurses came into the room and like covered his body and started wheeling it out, and he kept trying to get their attention and constantly failed. Obviously, they couldn't see him, and like not only is the human side of that absolutely terrifying, like
Oh yes.
like that must be possibly one of the that must be the most one of the most traumatic things you can go through, honestly, like kind of feeling kind of
Your own
locked
death.
out. Yeah, locked out.
Yeah.
And but it's like tales like that. So he's eventually resuscitated, and so he then ends up getting in effect sucked back into his body. And there are other stories of there was actually a scientific study done on this, and one of the big kind of data anomalies they found was that in NDE patients, people were able to describe accurately conversations going on in other rooms where they weren't when they died.
Yeah.
And so it's like that definitely reads to me, at least, as if there is some form of survival after death. And so yes, I don't know when it comes to ghosts. I think that I personally think that poltergeists, and so the entities that just throw things around and just cause havoc seemingly for the hell of it, are not human spirits.
No, I think there's several. I think that there's several different things. Yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned, a consciousness that pretends to be other things is in a
Yes.
different category than whatever may be, for lack of a better term, like the spirits
Yeah.
or just like the stone tape memory kind of thing.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think they're all different things.
Yes, I would agree with you there, definitely. Yeah, so continue on.
Okay. Well, still staying in the house for a minute. Like I mentioned that everybody that was in the house for a while had their own experience. After a while, my friends wouldn't come over anymore because
Of course.
weird things kept happening to them.
Yeah.
Like it was a nice place because I was in my teenager years, and the basement was fully furnished or fully finished, and it was essentially almost like having my own house because there was a large living room, there was a kitchen area, a bathroom, and two bedrooms down there.
Yep.
So my friends would come over, but I had one guy, he stopped coming over. He was in the hallway like on a phone call, and he looked over and saw like a face floating in the dark in one of the rooms, and he wouldn't come over after that.
Yeah.
um
The
yeah, I don't blame him.
Oh yeah, no, no, me neither. That reminds me of the 1989 case which took place in San Pedro, Los Angeles, with a woman named Jacqueline Hernandez, was basically pestered by this entity which would variously manifest as like black shadows, objects throwing themselves around, flying orbs, and most relevantly, a disembodied head just
Hmm.
floating in the attic. And
I haven't heard that one.
yeah, there's footage because they sent like a crew of reporters to the house, and they went up into the attic, and I could have sworn, again, if I'm remembering correctly, there is footage of like one of them effectively being attacked, and you kind of see, and like you see kind of like a slap mark appear on the back on
Wow.
their back, and this and like there was nobody else in the attic, and it's like it's one of those cases where it becomes extremely difficult to try and think of another explanation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so basically the kind of floating head thing definitely reminds me of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue on.
Yeah. On the subject of like things happening to my friends, I had a friend stay over and he couldn't sleep because it was the middle of winter and something like he kept on waking up to the window in the bedroom being open and
Ugh.
like just blowing in like snow and freezing air and stuff.
Hmm.
And that that was that. I had an uncle that lived there very briefly before I ever did, and he would always tease and make fun of Grandpa and Grandma when they would bring it up, um, which might be why they didn't later on in life.
Yeah.
But he'd say like, "Oh, that's ridiculous. There's no such thing in ghosts," and he would just relentlessly make fun of them. And they went to church one day, and he stayed behind because he wasn't religious. And he was down in the basement, and upstairs he heard a glass shatter, and he tracked footsteps from the back of the house all the way to the front, and
Huh.
he figured someone had broken in. And he went upstairs. He was going to go get him because he was tough, he was strong. And he went upstairs, and of course no one was there, no glasses
Yes.
broken, anything like that.
Hmm.
uh but I kind of had the feeling that this stuff tapered off, but
Hmm.
it didn't really.
Okay.
Grandma passed away in the summer of 2019. Uh, she was 96.
Wow.
Yeah. But my dad lives in the house with his wife now, and they have both had their own experiences. So
Okay.
shortly after, shortly after Grandma passed away, a week or two, Dad was outside working in the garden, and he just had this urge that he should turn around, and he did, and he saw Grandma standing there,
Huh.
and he tried to talk to her for a minute. Like he made some smart remark at her, just like a joke because he teased her a lot, and then she was just gone.
Hmm.
And something very similar like happened to his wife. It was when Grandma was in the hospital for about 1 week before she passed, and while she was in the hospital one day, uh, my dad's wife was walking around the house and she saw like a strange man standing by the door, and she tried to talk to him and he wouldn't respond to her. And so she got like a little scared and went to go find my dad, and they searched around the house and couldn't find him. And when she described him, she described my grandpa who passed away in 2006.
Huh.
So yeah. But
Wow.
as to the big thing, I don't know if it's the big thing, but I've told this part to a few people, and they think that it may have had something to do with the energies or experiences in the house.
Yep.
My grandpa was not related to me by blood.
Okay.
Uh, I only mentioned that because to tell you this part, he was married before he met my grandma,
Okay.
um, to a woman named Wilma.
Hmm.
And the only thing that I know about Wilma, the only story I really heard of her because it was a sore subject, was that she was like a very bad alcoholic, very bad. And Grandpa did not approve. He would always try to curb her drinking or convince her to drink less, and that led to her trying to drink in secret. So she would go to the liquor store and get a bottle of whatever her particular poison was, and they would package it in these just a nondescript brown bag. She would take it into her room, and to cover up the sound of the bag crinkling, she would, like a very loud, exaggerated coughing noise. And Grandpa would say, "Oh, you're coughing again," just to let her know that, I know what you're doing. You're not slick, you're not hiding it. But after Wilma passed away, he'd tell me that every once in a while he would still hear that coughing coming from her bedroom.
Huh.
Now, Wilma passed away from drinking bleach. She
Oh.
drank a whole bunch of bleach and it killed her. And I'm not entirely sure if it was a very bad mistake or if she wanted to commit suicide and chose like a terrible way to do it, but there you have it. So I don't believe she passed away in the house, but
Yeah.
that kind of energy,
Yeah. The
could stick.
kind of emotional kind of anguish, so to speak, and
Yeah.
like I don't know, like the kind of coughing thing sounds like a kind of stone tape style thing. Like it's just preserved in the house,
I,
so to speak.
yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't catch that. I got a phone call.
No, it's all good. I was saying that the coughing thing sounds like the stone tape style
Yes.
manifestation, with like it just preserved in the house, if you like. And yeah, it definitely wow, yeah.
So yeah, just one more kind of thing about the house, like before we move on to other stuff. It is not the biggest thing that happened or the most scary. But I gotta say that there was nearly always something inside the house, something small.
Mhm.
There was always like knocks and scratches like in the walls,
Yeah,
and that's just one of those things that you kind of learn to live with.
yeah.
But the biggest thing was the basement stairs.
Okay.
Going down into the basement, I had no issues.
Mm.
But every time I left the basement, I felt like something was just so close to me it could touch me, and it was extremely uncomfortable. It
Yeah,
was to the point where I would either run up as fast up the stairs as I possibly could, or I would put my back against the wall and kind of like shimmy up the stairs while watching behind me, just because
yeah,
I just felt so sure that something was there. I can't explain it, but it was the worst part about the house.
yeah. It's like I kind of like obviously I think that like every kid has that moment where they're coming downstairs at night and they just kind of sprint up the stairs and jump into bed to try
Yeah.
and out of fear that like something will grab them. And it's like it's really again like to bring it back to kind of folklore and stuff. The there's a story which originated in Lancashire and Yorkshire, but soon spread and became prominent in the southern United States. About Rawhead and Bloody Bones,
Hmm.
um, which is a monstrous bogeyman type creature, which lives under the stairs of old houses, and would and basically from between the like from between the stairs, as in so like the kind of slats between the stairs, it would apparently grab people's feet,
Oh.
and it's like got this kind of it does feel like that's kind of very universal human experience, which has been reflected in that lore, and it's like I wonder why that is such a such a universal human experience. It's like sure that's when we're vulnerable, but why is it specifically the stairs and all that?
I don't know.
Yeah. The so yeah. Uh, continue. We are now leaving your grandparents' house, I believe.
Yeah, that's that's more or less all the stories from Grandma and Grandpa's house. What I want to we could discuss now. What I think is what I caught your interest to begin with is I, I caught an Ask Reddit question, and it was parents, what is the strangest imaginary friend or creepiest imaginary friend that your children has mentioned? And
Mhm,
I got in there with the story of Purple Mommy. So,
mhm,
Purple Mommy, around the time my son was learning to talk, and he's very young, he was kind of barely walking,
mhm.
he would start telling us about something that he called Purple Mommy.
Okay.
And I don't have like a nice laid out story for it, but the more he talked about Purple Mommy, like the more we thought it was very strange and creepy. So over the course of probably about 2 years, we collected this information about Purple Mommy. So Purple Mommy was all black, and at the time he confused black and purple. So it
Okay.
could have been black or purple. Well, he said she was all purple, and he confused that with black. So, you know, do with that what you want.
Mhm.
And she had all white eyes, and he said that she had no smile, which meant no mouth.
Hmm.
Uh, Purple Mommy would pick him up at night, and Purple Mommy would turn off the lights. I think Purple Mommy needed a band-aid because she had blood. Purple Mommy could take her head off.
Jesus.
Purple Mommy did not like Daddy.
Oh dear.
And every time that we would ask him where Purple Mommy was, he would point to there was a corner of his room, where we always left his closet door open, just between the open closet door and the wall. And he would always point there. And sometimes Purple Mommy was there, sometimes she wasn't. Occasionally I remember once or twice him running out of his room when he was playing, and he was looking, kind of scared, and he would say, no, Purple Mommy's in there. I'm not going to be in there right now. So
Yeah, that
things like
is.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Go ahead.
That is absolutely horrifying, and I am. Yeah, that's it's caught the it's massively caught the attention of Reddit, and there's now.
Very much surprised me.
Did you know that there's now like fan art and a
Yeah, there's
subreddit
a whole
devoted
subreddit.
to
Yeah,
Purple Mummy?
I did see that someone made a Purple Mommy Reddit account too.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah,
yeah,
someone invited me to that, so like I'm enjoying the fan art, but
yeah,
it surprised me because to me that wasn't. It's just something real creepy and weird that my son said.
yeah,
It wasn't necessarily a ghost story to me,
yeah,
even though like it's very frightening. But nothing. It was an apartment, and we lived in that apartment for 5 years, and
yeah,
nothing strange happened other than that. But
yeah. It's like I don't know. I've heard loads of stories of like imaginary friends which are quite clearly as in within the context of the story, so whether or not the story is true or not. Obviously I know the Purple Mummy story is true, but like whether or not these other stories are true, like where these imaginary friends are obviously meant to be the ghost of the deceased, and so we'll often have like kind of bloody appearances. And I remember there was one on that do you know the television show Paranormal Witness?
yes, I like that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, it was one of my favorites as well. There was that story of I think they called him the Skeleton Man, where like the kid was drawing these pictures of this person in a white shirt with basically like exposed bone on his shoulder, and
Uh,
it turns out that someone had died in the house from an extremely gory accident, and the like that story sounds far too much like a kind of urban legend for me to kind of blindly accept it. But
yeah.
with the with the story of Purple Mummy, it reminds me of the work of of a paranormal investigator named Michael J. Hallowell, who wrote a book called Invisikids, which is a bit of a naff title, but you never mind. And it's basically a kind of paranormal look at the kind of imaginary friend phenomenon, and it has loads of stories in it about like children who are like playing. So there was a story from a mother, I believe, who saw her who said that her child was playing ball with one of his imaginary friends, and basically he pushed the ball and the ball stopped and without apparent cause rolled back to him.
Oh wow.
And it's like, first up, that's really creepy. Second, that's again like another example of the kind of these things being able to move things and yet also pass through solid things whenever they please. And it's like yeah, I don't know where I stand with kind of paranormal imaginary friend stories. It's like a lot of the more benevolent ones, you can kind of imagine them being kind of psychic phenomena.
Uh-huh.
So like things conjured up by children in need of a friend, basically. But with like more frightening things that no
Yeah,
one would.
why so scary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Why absolutely terrifying? And it's like that sort of that sort of thing really intrigues me. I don't really have a solid answer for that, but because like there's no reason why the child's kind of expectation of their imaginary companion should dictate that said imaginary companion be absolutely horrifying.
Yeah,
And
we I mean we didn't we tried to keep him away from seeing that kind of thing on TV.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
not that there would be anything
yeah,
so
definitely.
similar, but like we just kept him to kids programming and didn't watch like
Yeah,
adult stuff
yeah,
around him. So I just don't know where it comes from.
yeah,
But
yeah. That
two
is.
kind of interesting, I'm sorry,
Oh no,
two kind
continue.
of interesting, please go ahead. I'm sorry. I
No,
keep
sorry,
interrupting
sorry.
you.
I wasn't even. I've forgotten what I was saying now. Continue.
Okay. Well, a couple like interesting things, and they're not necessarily paranormal, but it is just strange things that kind of go along with the Purple Mommy story. When he said that Purple Mommy would pick him up, we would occasionally find him out of his crib in the morning because he had a crib with, we still had him in a crib at the time. He was young enough and it had like bars on the side. He would have had to crawl up over the side and then down to the floor to get out on his own
Yeah,
you
which
know
is.
he and he couldn't do that at the time. Like he would wake us up in the morning by he was up and ready to get up and he would just be like yelling and pulling on the crib and stuff. And the other thing about her turning off the lights is occasionally we would wake up in the morning and his little lamp was turned off and he was terrified of the dark. So like I said, both of those things are not necessarily paranormal, but it's just interesting that they do
Yeah,
fit in with what he was saying.
yeah. The it kind of the whole thing about the purple mummy lifting him up. It does remind me of the work of Joshua Cutchin, who we've had as a guest on this podcast before. His book specifically, Thieves in the Night, which talks about kind of supernatural, like kind of stories like the kind of folkloric changeling, and also stories of like poltergeists levitating children, and like kind of so it really it really doesn't kind of. So this is another point where I'm just saying doesn't strike me as out of character
Yeah.
for one of these intelligences, for lack of a better term, to like kind of take an interest in spending time with the children, which is
Well,
really quite disconcerting.
yeah. Well, another kind of interesting thing is like the popularity of this post. I got like so many comments and messages on it. And I was very surprised to begin with because I had posted that story before. In fact, for like this one, I just copied and pasted it. But like the very first time I did it, it got like absolutely no,
Mm,
I think like 3 upvotes and no comments or something. But several different people commented saying that they had a similar experience with maybe not necessarily the same, but they had a purple friend or their children were talking about having a purple lady.
yeah,
And at least one woman, and this kind of comes back to what you were saying about like your expectations tempering reality.
yeah,
One person messaged me saying that they saw purple mommy in their house after that. And I don't know if they're making it up, but or if they scared themselves into it or
yeah,
accidentally created a tulpa. But
yeah, yeah,
it's just that kind of. I just find it interesting.
yeah. No, it is. It's absolutely fascinating. I yeah, I don't know why purple, so to speak. I mean,
I don't
I could
know.
speculate. I have a
Please
kind
do.
of grisly potential explanation, which is that corpses when they're bloated and all the blood vessels have burst, they can often appear purple. The reason why I know this, is because of vampire folklore. And vampires in actual medieval lore were not sexy. They were often described as hideously bloated and either bright red or bright purple.
Like a corpse.
Yeah, exactly like a corpse. In fact, I'd kind of compare the kind of folkloric vampire much more to our modern zombies than the kind of sexy Twilight vampire.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely a precedent for and a reason, like kind of even almost like kind of psychological kind of archetypal reason for why these things might appear as purple. Because again, we are like kind of almost it almost seems to be an innate it's definitely an innate aversion to the dead. And so it's like you are, because corpses spread disease and all of that, and so it is a kind of it feels like kind of evolutionary thing that you need to avoid the dead. And so it's not really surprising to me that like loads of folklore has sprung up around like the dead getting back up and spreading disease, which is effectively what a vampire does. And but then to have these various nighttime ghouls as Purple Mummy seems to be explicitly purple, or be described at least as purple, really interests me. Obviously, like without the blood and the bandages and all of that, Purple Mummy sounds, if she was entirely black, sounds a lot like a shadow person.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's obviously shadow people are not at all uncommon. And like, though I haven't heard stories of actually, I have heard stories of shadow people physically interacting with people, but never lifting people up.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, it would be theoretically possible for for a shadow person to lift someone up. Based on like, there are stories of shadow people like scratching people and even like dragging. Like, there was one which I read in a book by David Weatherly, who's a great paranormal investigator. Of a time when a shadow person basically reached out from underneath someone's bed, which sounds extraordinarily cliche, but basically this entity was able to grab onto this person's ankles and drag them and attempt to drag them under.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I know. And so it's like these things clearly can interact physically, and so it doesn't. If Purple Mummy didn't have the bandages and blood, then I'd say that sounds a lot like what was going on. But again, it's Purple Mummy kind of lingers in that space lingers in that kind of uncategorizable space. It's like again, I'm like, yeah, I was honestly like, Purple Mummy sounds so much like something out of a horror story that when I messaged you, I was expecting you to say, "Oh no, it isn't true, but please don't give the game away." And it's like,
well,
I'm obviously not accusing you of lying here. I'm saying like, I have had experiences before with potential witnesses where I say, "Hi, like, I am a paranormal investigator. Could you tell me more about this?" And they say, "Oh no, it's not true. Just don't give the game away." And so yeah, just because people like spooky stories, I'm not going to go and rain on their parade. But it is like, it does sound like something out of a horror story, and I can't really. I find it yeah, I'm not surprised that it's massively popular now.
right.
It's like, I think it just. Sorry, continue.
Oh no. I was just gonna say. No, I don't fault people for not believing it because because like you said, it does sound like it's something out of a horror story. Like, even the name came up, Purple Mommy. It has like a certain kind of like sting to it, I guess, or
definitely.
I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a fantastic name, right?
Yes, certainly.
But no, I never thought of it as paranormal. I just thought, something that he came up with, and it was weird.
Hmm.
But like nothing that I'm telling you I've made up. Like
Oh no, I know.
I
Yeah,
know. I
and
I I believe all of it. I believe everything I'm telling you.
oh
Like
yeah.
I actively seek this stuff out and I'm fascinated by it and I have a
Mhm.
tendency to attribute things to the paranormal,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm not lying about any of it.
yeah, yeah. No, I definitely get that from you. Yeah, I definitely believe you. I I think that it is absolutely fascinating. I kind of like on with other interviews with other witnesses. I've talked about how it sometimes seems that like the people, like people themselves, or some people themselves, are kind of magnets to strangeness.
Well, I think
And
I think that you invite it to a certain extent.
yeah,
If you're more open to it, you're going to find more of it. 'Cause
yes,
for better or worse, like if you look hard enough for something, you're going to find it, regardless of
certainly,
whether or not it's actually there.
yes,
So I think like if these phenomena are real and you have someone like me who's been interested in it since I was a kid and I'm actively looking for it,
yes,
maybe that's why it would show itself to me more. And if
yeah,
you have someone who's completely a skeptic, like there's no, I mean, an amount of skepticism is very healthy and I appreciate and
yes,
respect that. But if you don't believe in any of this stuff at all, there's no
yeah,
amount of evidence or experience you can have that you're not going to be able to explain away.
yeah. There's a there's a hardcore kind of materialist, kind of like pop skeptic, basically. So like person who makes their living out of like debunking people's stories and just basically accusing them of lying. And then it's like on one of their blog posts, and I'm obviously not going to mention their name, but on one of their blog posts they talked about how they when they were a child they saw some bizarre humanoids like outside their window, and then they said, "Ah, isn't the power of the brain marvelous?" And just moved on entirely. And it's like they had a paranormal experience. Like they experienced the thing they are devoting their entire life to poo-pooing. And yes, and yet they were just able to completely brush it off. And
Well,
it's like, yeah, I think there is an extent, there is a kind of want to believe effect to an extent.
uh,
Yeah. Continue?
so you know, because of like all this stuff, like I've gotten in the habit of like asking everybody I know if they've had
Mm.
believe in ghosts or have any strange or
Hmm.
paranormal experiences, and I actively seek this stuff out. So
Yeah.
one of the things within the last year or so, I've taken up a new hobby of my wife and I will find a place to ghost box.
Hmm.
Um, are you familiar with or have you seen Hellier?
I have seen Helia. The Helia is one of those. It's one of those things which has been very influential on the formation of our group, actually.
Yeah, it's
And
fantastic.
oh yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And so yeah. Let me guess. Estes Method.
Estes Method, yes. Because, you know, I had watched it when it came out, and
Hmm.
then I got my wife to rewatch it with me, and we both I kind of forgot just how intense that show is because
Yeah.
I just rewatched it like this past year, and we were getting ready to go investigate a haunted house. And I was looking, I'm like, hey, I think I would like to do the ghost box. And
Mm-hmm.
so we overnight we bought a ghost box and overnighted it to the house. And as a side note, as expensive as it was, I should have gotten a ticket on that plane, but it's something we've started doing. And I mean, obviously you're familiar, but for people who are not, a ghost box is like a little AM/FM radio that transmits between stations like as quick as it can. And if you pick up any words through there ostensibly, like that's supposed to be spirits communicating with you. And I actually have it. I'm holding it in my hand right now. I could turn it on for a second just to get an idea of what it sounds like if you like.
Oh, please do.
Okay. Give me just a second here. Let me know if you can hear it.
Yep, hear it.
Yeah, but like if you caught that, like it gives you an idea of what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so with the Estes method, I plug in headphones to it and put on noise canceling headphones on top of it. And the idea is that, if you and I were to sit down and do this, and you were to say, is there anybody here with us? Regardless of what's coming through that box, we are both now looking for an answer that makes sense
Yes.
to that question. So
Yes.
the idea here is that I can't hear anything that generally I'm on the box and my wife is asking the questions and I can't hear anything she's saying. So whatever I come up with is whatever I come up with, and occasionally it makes sense, occasionally it doesn't.
Yeah.
I also kind of have the theory that a lot of the stuff that comes through the box is not necessarily directed at us. I think it's other spirits or entities or what have you, like talking to each other. I think like a
Yes.
lot of it makes more sense that way. So
Yeah. It's
um,
the experience in Hellier season 2 with with like Archangel Michael, all that is just
it was intense.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it is kind of like for me the Estes method kind of ties this whole thing back into kind of like the unconscious, and there's a wait, let me just what was the name of it? There's an experiment which has been done. Numbers. I know that I'm not supposed to be Googling things while hosting a podcast, but I am currently Googling something right now. Numbers, quantum physics. Because there is this observer effect numbers.
Baby.
Because basically, I can't find it. Wait, here we go. Basically, there is this experiment which has been done with like a random number generator, and basically it asks the participant to picture a number and to hold that number in their head. And then it's been found to be statistically significant in this random number generator that number comes up more often than it would otherwise.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've seen like a similar experience too, where they would have a room with a light that goes around
Yeah.
the room and like a plant in a corner of the room, and they found that even though they've set it up to be completely random what the light focuses on, it has a tendency to focus more on the plant than anything else.
Yes. Yeah,
So
which is yeah, it's really fascinating the way that there's this kind of, it feels almost like there's this kind of underbelly of physics that we just don't understand yet.
yeah.
And so yeah, I definitely think that the Estes method kind of feels like it's connected to that to an extent.
Yeah.
And
so
yeah.
That's something that I absolutely love to do. We just go around looking for different places to do it. We live fairly close to a place called the Hannah House, which was part of the Underground Railroad during slavery times. And I believe there was a fire that broke out and killed several slaves. But we will go there, and we don't go on the property because it's no longer open to the public, but we'll sit across the street and do it. And the very first time we were ever there, it was so surprising. Like it blew my mind. It's like we woke up the house. We got so much. It's the most coherent session we've ever had anywhere. But my wife asked,
what happened.
Well, several things. My wife, one of the things she asked was how many people are here, and it gave us the number. It said 4, and then over the course of the session, it gave us 4 different names. And it seems to me you don't necessarily know when they're switching out, but there are distinct personalities. like there's one called Love, which was very helpful and sweet. There's another one that was it's very jokey and kind of flirtatious, and every time we're there, it pushes the boundaries a little bit more to the point where like it was asking my wife to come to bed with it. Yeah,
Hmm.
but they they will also do things like not just at the Hannah house, but everywhere we've ever been.
Hmm.
They seem very insistent on us seeing them and being frustrated when we cannot. Like
Hmm.
they'll repeat, see it, see it, see it over and over again. And,
That's
and
truly fascinating.
yeah,
It's like it kind of reminds me of a kind of a reverse of like the of like entity behavior as depicted in a lot of kind of like ancient kind of fairy folklore, which is just a quick note about fairies. Do you know much about how they were actually represented in medieval folklore?
not necessarily. I'm a little bit familiar with fairies and the fae, but I'm not. I don't know about artwork or folk like
So
that. If
basically,
that's what you're.
no, what I was trying to say is that like the kind of gossamer winged like kind of little little child fairies were invented by the Victorians. Like the medieval fairies, the fairies from much older folklore across Europe, they are much closer to our modern conception of extraterrestrials, and so they are diminutive humanoids associated with lights in the sky, and they are known to abduct people, and
Hmm.
they're very much something to be feared, and
Yeah.
it reminds me of there are a lot of there are a lot of stories of like people seeing these entities, the Fae, and these creatures seemingly being shocked that they can be seen, and so like just kind of like going about their business, and they realize that the witness can see them, and they are shocked by this,
Huh.
which is really interesting because it's like the kind of the I think it was Patrick Harper who said that like inversion is representation, and so it's like the something which you said is that like the fair so in fairy folklore, like it says that the fairies are always they're leaving, so the fairies are going to be leaving the landscape in the future, and they will soon be gone, and of course they never disappear, they never actually go. And then seeing that with modern extraterrestrial lore, like the aliens are always coming, disclosure is always just around the corner,
Yeah.
and it's like it's just a reverse of the old fairy trope. And the I I definitely recommend that you read John Keel, that you read like the Mothman prophecies and things like
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
Um,
Uh,
I yeah, I think that you would get a lot out of that.
Yeah,
Oh
we are actually taking a trip this summer to, I believe it's Point Pleasant
yeah,
is
Point
where all
Pleasant,
that was,
West Virginia.
and
Yep.
Hellier, Kentucky.
Oh
So we're
wow.
gonna go here in June, um, to kind of like poke around and see what kind of stuff we can get into.
I am extremely jealous. Um, yeah, I've been trying to I've been trying to um I've been trying to persuade my girlfriend to visit Rendlesham Forest with me,
Yeah,
which is the site of a December 1980 UFO incident.
I'm familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, also known as Britain's Roswell. And yeah, I've been trying to persuade my girlfriend to come visit that. But you know, um, yeah, I'm sure like basically enjoy the trip to Hellier and Point Pleasant.
Well, thank you.
I would I would definitely recommend you read the Mothman prophecies beforehand. Um, the
Sure.
there is a lot of sites you could go and visit, which are very intriguing. Um, so now on to one other thing which you mentioned in your messages to me, the Whispers Estate.
Yeah, the Whispers Estate. It's very interesting. It's a house, little Victorian house in a very very small town called Mitchell, Indiana, and the house was reportedly haunted. And I don't know, sometime 10 years or so ago, someone bought it and they opened it up to like tours and investigations for the public. Well, eventually they couldn't handle the cost of it anymore, and they're putting it up for sale. The town of Mitchell, Indiana, wants to destroy it because they don't like the tourism it brings in. It's the town it's in is more like a village. It's very small,
Hmm.
and they just don't like outsiders being there, and people can get noisy or whatever. But my wife's uncle actually bought the place, and because he would go there a lot and do investigations and things. Um, and just as a side note, I'm sorry, I feel like I kind of ramble sometimes,
No,
but
it's okay. It's great.
yeah, as a side note, like if you're interested, and there is a documentary on Amazon Prime about it. Is very short, and my wife's uncle is actually in it briefly.
Hmm.
And there is, I believe it's called Paranormal Encounters, a YouTube show where people investigate haunted places. Connor and India are the hosts, and they have been there twice.
Oh.
But anyways, my wife's uncle owns the place now, and he's invited us to do investigations a couple times, and I've been there twice. And the first time we had we had a few experiences there. Our group was down in the basement, and we had like a REM pod. One of the interesting things about the house is you have flashlights, and we bought flashlights specifically for this purpose at the store. We didn't get them from the house, and we'll take them there, and they will be turned on and off in response to questions. And I
Hmm.
know how crazy that sounds because my wife went before I ever did, and I sort of didn't believe it. But when
Hmm.
you get there and you see it happening,
Yeah.
it's insane. But we were down in the basement doing that and asking questions, and the light flashed on and off a couple times, and I started hearing whispering, and I thought it was one of like the women in our group because it kind of sounded to me distinctly female, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. And of course, nobody would admit to it, and nobody else heard it. But it got the name the Whispers Estate because of like the tendency of people to hear whispers in the house. Um, just a little bit of backstory before I get into the ghost stuff about the house is whether or not you believe in ghosts, it's definitely an unfortunate house. There have been at least 17 deaths in the house that have been recorded. Um, it was purchased by a doctor in the early to mid 1800s, and he ran his practice out of it. And it, at that time, like if someone died, you know, on the property, they would just leave him there until the family came to get him. And other than the 17 occupants of the house that have died there, they found at least four bodies buried on the property,
Wow.
and there may be more, but they would be
Jesus.
under the foundation of what's now the garage or
Hmm.
something. But the doctor ran his practice there, and his daughter died there on Christmas Day because she had snuck downstairs like in the morning to investigate presents or something. And at that time, they didn't have lights in the tree. It would have a tendency to be like candles, and she accidentally
Oh.
pulled the tree over on herself, and she was severely burned. And there's actually like
Oh.
still damage on the walls from the fire. But
Jesus.
she didn't die on that happened on Christmas Day, but she didn't die on Christmas Day. Sorry, I didn't. I was wrong. She lived maybe 3 or 4 days. Um, she died. It was used for a while as a tenement house. And over the holidays, like a man drowned in the bathtub, and he wasn't found for a week or so because it was again around Christmas time, and the other occupants were visiting family, and he had stayed home. So uh, I don't remember all these. Like the last person to die in the house was in the early 90s, I think. Like at that time the house was abandoned, and there was two brothers who would break in and kind of party in the house.
Hmm.
And they had gotten into a fight once, and one brother accidentally killed the other one in a fight, and he went to jail for it. And I don't know if he was out on bond before his trial or something like that, but he got back into the house very shortly after that and hung himself in the basement where he killed his brother because he was very remorseful about it. He's didn't mean to kill him, but
Yeah.
so
Jeez.
there is just very unfortunate history to the house, whether or not you believe there's ghosts. But uh, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go ahead and tell you there's ghosts in that house because
Yep.
of all the stuff that I've experienced.
It's
Um,
like, sorry. It
well,
kind
go
of
ahead.
it kind of reminds me of I can't remember who it was that theorized this, but there are kind of like so I've heard rumors. I haven't been able to track down a solid source for this, but that Gettysburg battlefield was haunted before the battle.
Really?
And so this is kind of one of those kind of the ones that got away. This is one of the kind of tangents which I haven't been able to track down. But basically the theory behind that was that they were saying that like there are specific areas where these sorts of things tend to happen, and somehow where these sorts of things take place, and it's kind of already going to be a site of tragedy before the tragedy actually happens. And I know that is unscientific in the extreme, but it's still
Yeah.
very interesting to see these kind of properties where just everything that could go wrong does.
Yes.
And it's like it does make you wonder about these things.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah, so tell me about the ghosts.
well, I think I told you about hearing the whispers in the basement and the flashlights. Um, we at one point during our first visit, we went upstairs and did ghost boxing, and we didn't get a whole lot of experience except for we turn off all the lights, and they have the windows like boarded up and plastered over, so like if you see any lights it's not going to be traffic lights, because something that I did not personally see but is a common phenomenon reported in the house is like blue lights, especially like in the attics. But so they have all the windows boarded up and blacked over. So the point I'm getting at is like you turn off the lights to do a lot of this, and it's so completely and utterly dark. It's the
Yeah,
old cliche that you can't see your hand in front of your face, but it's
yeah,
true. Like there's very few times, at least in my personal life, where you're somewhere that's so dark.
yes.
But we were upstairs doing the ghost box, and again, how I mentioned like some of the stuff we hear coming through the ghost box isn't for us, but to other people.
Mm, yeah.
Like we heard the door at the end of the hallway like slam shut, and like some footsteps stomping, and something said he's coming, and then
Mm,
that something else said, don't go there, they're over there.
huh.
And then one of the questions that was asked is like, are we welcome here? Is it okay? And it immediately said like, leave, run. And we actually like packed up right there, and at least
Wow.
got out of that floor. We went back downstairs. But
Yeah.
some of the other things that have happened there is there's uh, a little boy that died in the house. He was very sick, but he would always like play in the closet of his bedroom. I don't know why, kids are weird, but he would. And the bedroom closet door will occasionally open on its own. And it's one of those things, you test it. Richard, my wife's uncle, will he wants you to show that none of this stuff is just happening on its own. Like he'll go over there and jerk on the door, it latches properly. You open it, it kind of stays where it is, so it's not the leveling of the house or
Yeah.
anything. It doesn't open on its own from natural causes. But with the last time I was there, we saw it open as we were going
Huh.
through. Just open on its own, and we went in there and did the ghost box stuff, and something touched me. I
Oof.
I swear on my life, I was sitting with my legs folded, and I was doing the ghost box. People were asking questions, and something kind of like gently caressed my knee, and I was sitting next to a wall, so no one had like come around and come through the wall and touched me. And then like a couple minutes later, it freaked me out, but I'm like, okay, let's go on. This is interesting. I want to do it. And a couple minutes later, one of the things I said is I got his leg. So,
Oof. Wow.
um,
So you just quick aside. You mentioned that you have a YouTube, or you mentioned in your messages to me that you have a YouTube channel where these things are recorded.
yeah,
And I'm obviously not going to say the name of the YouTube channel, but
thank you.
do you are the are these sessions recorded on there?
Yeah, they're all on there.
Huh.
Um, they will
Wow.
be labeled as Whispers of State with a date on them. Just look at
Hmm.
the most recent ones if you want to look at them.
Will do.
Um, and
That's
then
fascinating.
what? Yeah. Well, one of the things that gets me is like it. I will occasionally get people's names of people who are with us coming through the box, and that always blows my mind
Yeah.
because it's such a coincidence. If nothing is directly manipulating what I'm hearing, then how are you hearing someone say a name coming through the box at the
Yes.
exact moment that you're talking about it? And one of the guys in our group, his name is Garvin, and that's a fucking weird name. Who I don't know anybody else named Garvin. And
Yep.
how would that come through the box, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That is really interesting.
But
It's like
yeah,
it's like yeah. It's like, don't get me wrong. When I was talking about like the kind of quantum numbers experiment, I wasn't saying that like it's random chance. I was saying that that might be some mechanism by which these things happen, which we don't understand yet.
yeah, it's
And
evidence that it isn't entirely random.
exactly, yeah. And yeah, so that is really fascinating.
Yeah,
I think that at the end of this show, I'll do a kind of addendum thing where I'll play some of the footage from the ghost box when I put it up on
please
the
do.
channel. And
Yeah, there's not much to see because, well, at least the whisper stuff is in the dark, and we're not doing it to film us
yeah,
on the phone, set it down so we can have like the audio of it. Because a lot of the times, like we don't really understand the significance of like the answers we get until we go back and listen to it. And
yeah,
of course, like 99% of the time I'm the one on the box and I don't know what's going on and I like to hear it anyways because I only know what I'm saying.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
but one of the other, I don't know how we're doing on time, but like you're
Oh no, the
coming to the end.
no, we've got loads of time. You can keep going.
Oh, well, just a couple other things about like, interesting things that happen around the house. Like one of the more fascinating things that I found is, when we were going around the house the first time, Richard, my wife's uncle, was giving us the tour, and I was just noticing change
Huh.
everywhere, just absolutely everywhere on the floor. And I asked him about it, and he's like, "Oh, we'll get to it." And he explained, they call it pennies from heaven,
Mhm.
and it's just something interesting that happens in the house. Um, like almost everybody that's there will hear change hitting the ground, and it's just coming out of the ceiling or something.
Yeah.
Like one or two people have seen it happen where it will just, it's mostly pennies. Occasionally you will get nickels or something like that. It will just fall down from the ceiling.
Huh. Yeah,
Uh, I,
that's yeah, continue.
yeah, I was just going to say, I find that like very fascinating. I don't really know what to make of it.
I do. It's a the sudden appearance of coins out of nowhere is a motif which pops up a lot in poltergeist cases and fairy stories. So, for example, the Demon Drummer of Tedworth, a poltergeist case that began in 1661. It at one point it involved the witness's house having money randomly strewn about it overnight at one and like a Saint Jean Baptiste Vianney, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, is a French saint. He was followed around by manifestations of what he called celestial money, which would appear in his drawers, pockets, and even in the ashes of his hearth.
Huh.
In 1930s Sicily, a friend of the father of a Fortean Times correspondent named Jack Romano would often witness the shining apparition of a female figure on the other end of a bridge over a river, shortly followed by two brand new coins literally falling out of the air just in front of him. This happened repeatedly for several days, and this kid was able to amass quite a handsome sum. He eventually bought his sister to try and get corroboration for the event, and she was unable to see the apparition, despite the fact that he insisted it was there. But she indeed saw two coins fall out of nowhere and land on the bridge, and it's like that's definitely that is definitely a thing which happens for some reason.
See, I have not heard that.
Yeah, it's a again, if you want to look at the kind of folkloric trends in poltergeist behavior, there's a specific book which I can recommend, which is The Hidden Folk by S.D. Tucker.
Okay.
Which has all this information in it, and it's absolutely great. I've got no idea. Yes, I give it my full endorsement. I have no idea why the only review for it on Amazon UK is a 1-star review. I have no idea why somebody thought that. Like, they should have known they were reading a book about poltergeists, and so if they don't believe in poltergeists, don't read the book.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, basically, it's probably one of the best books on poltergeists I've read. I definitely recommend it.
I'd love to.
Yeah. So, have you got anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, I got like 2 or 3 more quick little things, like about the house, and then one other side story.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the other things, that one of the sessions we were doing upstairs, one of the things that they like to do in the house is, like, there's an old bed frame up in the attic, and Richard tells us, everybody put your fingers on it and it will start rocking and stuff. Well, we were up there again doing the ghost box, and that second time we were there, the entire time we were there, every single session we had on the box, everything was very insistent that we leave. And we didn't leave, which I wasn't entirely happy with, because I learned a lesson the hard way about respecting when something tells you to leave. But it kept on telling us to leave, and the floor started like rocking really hard. I thought people were like moving around next to me, but like they were all still, and it's just the floor was just rumbling like someone was stomping violently on it. And yeah. Oh, a girl got. Sorry, I think there's a little bit of lag, and I keep interrupting you.
No, it's okay. It's all good. Continue.
One of the things about like being told to leave, a girl in our group that time she says she was pushed down the stairs, and I believe her, because she was absolutely distraught when it happened, and like just as scared as I've ever seen a person, and she immediately left. But she said she was pushed down the stairs, and I think that's just a part of like being told repeatedly over and over that you're not welcome here, get out of here, and then we're not doing it. It's just a little bit disrespectful, I fear, because like one of the things about like whatever we're talking to, if you believe that it's a consciousness or a person, they're going to have like I don't necessarily want to say the same, but similar wants and fears and things like that. And they want their own personal space. And if you lived in this house and now there's people just hanging out, asking a bunch of weird questions and putting strange electronics all over the place, then you're probably going to be mad at them. Like if someone was in my house and wouldn't leave after I asked them to, I would definitely shove them or something.
Yeah.
It resort to violence at some point.
Yeah.
Uh, and that also side tangent, but that also goes to like different personalities. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna find helpful and nice spirits, and then angry and mischievous people too. But
Yeah. It's just like I think that like so Michael J. Hallowell, the author who wrote that book about imaginary friends, he later converted to Islam, because there's stories in the Islamic canon about creatures called the jinn, or genies as they've been westernized, and
yeah,
basically these beings apparently live in kind of they live on the same planet as us, but they live in a kind of different dimension, so to speak. And they are just like us. They have their own thoughts, they have their own feelings, they have their own fears. They grow old, they die, but they interact with us. Not like they interact. They can be both good and bad, and they can follow different religions. And a lot of the stories of interactions with these so-called jinn, they're very tricksterish, and they come across as mischievous, very much like poltergeists. And I personally I don't think that Islam is literally true, and I don't really ally myself to any particular religion. But
sure.
I think that like one of the best depictions of the kind of non-local consciousness element of the phenomenon, so to speak, would be the Islamic jinn, because it just does it it rings very much true with what we are talking about. And so it's like the jinn, for me, or the way I think of it, is the jinn are just another name for what we call poltergeists, and what in other forms what people call aliens, what people call things like
Sure.
Bigfoot. And
All
it's
just different
like,
names for the same phenomena,
yeah, exactly.
just different cultures.
Yeah. And like the fairies are almost identical to the jinn. And so you have the jinn in Morocco are known to steal children at night and replace them with their own young. And
The
then of course
changelings.
the fair exactly, and then the fairies of Ireland do exactly the same thing. And so it does seem as if like there's different cultural lenses applied to these things, but they're always the same, and they behave they behave in the ways that they do across different cultures and across thousands of years. And it just is absolutely fascinating to me to think that like there's this there's this I think the phrase I've used is kind of like hidden ecosystem. It's like
Mhm.
it feels like kind of a kind of I imagine it as kind of in a completely invisible ecosystem filled with this sort of thing that we just can't understand yet. And that's one of those things which keeps me endlessly intrigued by the paranormal. It's like I I'm fascinated by concepts like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a natural phenomenon that we just don't necessarily understand yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's only supernatural in that it is beyond our current understanding of the natural.
Hmm.
And so yeah, on that wonderful note, unless you have any other stories to say, I think we shall leave it to there.
Yeah, we could leave it there.
Cool. Do you have anything else to say, or no?
Uh, well, I could give you like one more story if you
Oh
wanted.
yes, please.
Concerning
Always.
one or two. I'm sorry, I just don't want to take too much of your time. I think we're like nearing 2 hours here, but
No, it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine.
okay,
We've done we've done episodes before which are 2.5 hours. It's all good.
okay. Well, I have like a couple other stories. I'll give you three stories. We'll keep it to three
Okay.
stories. I mentioned that I learned the hard way about leaving when things tell you to leave.
Hmm.
Well, um, I don't know if you are familiar with H. Holmes.
I am,
He,
yes.
yeah, he towards the end of his career as a serial killer, for
Hmm.
he killed a lot of people. As you were, if people are not familiar with him, he stopped in a place called Mitchell, Indiana, and we live in Indiana. So at one point, my wife and I had gone on a ghost tour there, and honestly, it was kind of boring. But they mentioned that the library is haunted, so we're like, okay, well, we will travel to the library and see if we can do a ghost box there. And it was the strangest one I've ever had. And I think like a lot of it that we got was things talking to each other. Um, and again, this is on the recordings if you want to listen to it. But I did not feel good. I felt distinctly bad and kind of like frightened the whole time I was doing that. And that's not common for this kind of thing. I never have before. But towards the end, it stopped sounding like I'm getting clips from the radio, and it sounded like someone had recorded something and was cutting up the audio and playing it back in the right
Hmm.
order,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it got like weird metallic robot voice that made me like deeply uncomfortable.
Oh
And
yes.
some of the things that it was saying at first, before it was doing that, it was saying something like we can't talk to them, or something like that. And but what I remember is one of them saying he's coming, something like that. And then at one point it said not safe, woman, while my wife is talking to it. And my wife meant it, she took that to mean that they were scared of us, like they were worried about us being there and that we would hurt them. And my wife says, well, we would never hurt you, and then immediately responds, but he will.
Ooh. Ooh.
And
Yep.
so we were like uncomfortable, and like we left the library. And she said, do you want to go home? And I'm like, no, let's do one more session. And right around the corner, uh, just a couple blocks away is the site of where H.H. Holmes killed a young boy, and his body was buried on what is now just a vacant lot that you can just go into. So we went over there and decided that that would be an interesting place to do it. And that recording is like almost exactly 2 minutes long.
Yep.
It did not go well because we got in there, and she started asking questions, and it I think one of the first things it said is, you will get nothing from me. And then it said, come down in the ground and rest with me, or something like that. And then it said, you could have already been driving and not conversation, which to me I took to mean like you should have already left and been out
Yeah.
of here. And then it just screamed. It
Oh
was
my
just like
God.
a deep, high scream as a man screaming. There was no music. It didn't sound like it was part of like metal or something. It was just a man going like like very loudly, and it
Jesus.
just scared the shit out of me.
Can imagine.
So yeah, we left straight away, and after that, take it like a lot more serious when things tell us to leave.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
yeah,
So
going back to, yeah,
yeah,
please,
continue.
sorry
No,
if you have like questions or comments.
I was just going to say that the topic of H.H. Holmes and like the kind of that. Do you think that that is just some other entity which is existing in that area due to the residual energy, so to speak, left behind by Holmes's crimes?
Yeah, I think it's something pretty nasty or negative that may have been there
Yeah.
on its own, or
Yeah.
it, or may have been exacerbated by what Holmes did, or vice versa.
Definitely. Yes, I
I
would
don't
agree with you.
him, but
Yes.
because a couple other things like I think it was like the outlaw Jesse James was in Mitchell, Indiana. I
Mm.
maybe it was Jesse James. It was some famous outlaw or something. I can't exactly remember who it was, but he was there and shot up a bank or something. But going kind of back to the fairies and the fae, we've had like a couple experiences that, I am not necessarily as familiar with the fae as my wife is,
Yep.
but like things that she has attributed to it. Because two or three times now we have done ghost boxing, and we won't get any responses other than a bunch of whistling.
Huh.
And I don't think that that's necessarily associated with them, but she got the distinct feeling I don't know that it was. It was just a
Yeah,
whole bunch of whistling.
it
But
is.
it is
It
okay.
is
Well,
associated with them. The like, and also interestingly enough, whistling vocalizations is very much associated with Bigfoot. And now you might think that that is entirely irrelevant, but Bigfoot again is one of these topics which, when you bring it into the kind of, when you bring it out of the kind of material and into the kind of considering like kind of these other consciousnesses and all of that, and the way they seem to be able to kind of almost construct physical appearances for themselves, you start
uh,
to you start to see some odd things, such as so Bigfoot is famous for the wood knocking, and poltergeists are famous for knocking on walls. Bigfoot is famous for making like screaming sounds and crying baby noises as well, and ghosts haunting bridges specifically make crying baby noises. There's a series of books recently which has been published by Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin called Where the Footprints End, which I would highly recommend again, because that basically talks about all the kind of strange, kind of non-material, folkloristic kind of aspects of the Bigfoot phenomenon. And like, the reason why I bring it up is because the kind of whistling noise is very much associated with that. And then Fae. So the English Fae, an English fairy known as the Boggart, was often described as a tall, hairy man.
hmm.
And so the kind of wild man archetype has existed for centuries. And in my mind, Bigfoot is just yet another manifestation of
One of
this.
those. Okay.
And so yes, continue with the Fae.
Okay. I know it's just a couple more stories, but you were talking about the thing crying in the woods, and that reminded me of another story. This one did not happen to me, so I hope it's okay to tell it,
Yeah,
but
it's
it
all good.
was a close personal friend of mine. Because I mentioned earlier, I ask everybody I meet at some point, if I talk to them long enough, if they have like paranormal or scary
Yeah.
stories. But this is the one he told me. He and a girl had gone on a date, and towards the end of the date, they didn't want to go home or end it or anything, so they decided, let's take a walk. And they decided, just there's some railroad tracks near where they were, and they decided to walk down the railroad tracks. And on one side of the railroad tracks, there's like a wooded area. So they're walking for a while, and they started hearing weird noises, and they stopped, and it was the sound of like a child crying in the wooded area next to them. And they kind of debated for a minute if they should go and check on that, but both of them simultaneously decided that that felt like a really bad idea.
Yeah.
And so they kind of started heading back to the car, and they heard like a bunch of like branches cracking and something like the sound of something large moving through the woods
Yeah.
next to them, following them. And at one point they decided to run. And I think
Yeah.
like he said that he actually like picked her up and like ran carrying her, and the thing that was making like the baby crying noises like kept pace with them the whole time. I mean, they didn't see anything, but it was just stuff crashing through the woods.
Yeah. The
So
um I think it's Timothy Renner who came up with the term wildnisgeest, which I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but that means ghost of the wilderness, and it's very much similar to a poltergeist, which means noisy ghost, of course. And so this wildnisgeist term, he applies that to Bigfoot, and this and so the description of a large but not seen creature um, making a baby crying noise and managing to keep pace with people running. It it strikes me as a report of that variety. So Bigfoot, Wildernessgeist, Bogart, whatever you want to call it, and yeah, so that is absolutely fascinating.
grandma's house is in the woods. I didn't really mention that. I mean, but just to set the stage, it is. But they have like 2 acres of forest essentially, but nothing strange or anything ever happened out in the woods. I spent a lot of time out there as a kid, and it was just always peaceful and nice.
Yeah.
But the last thing that I'll bring up is it's another thing. Like I said, I am not extremely versed in the Fae. I'm aware of them and some of the things they do, but my wife attributed it to the Fae.
Mhm.
So one of the things, one of my hobbies, I like to play video games. I work more or less an opposite schedule from my wife, so I spend the week at home when she's at work, and I work on the weekends. But I play a lot of video games, so I had picked up Assassin's Creed Valhalla when it came out, and in November, and I was excited to play it. But I got it on the Xbox, and I have one of the old model Xbox Ones with the external power source, and one of the problems they have is that it burns out, and then you just can't play it. So my wife and my son left the house. They were like, okay, we're going to go do some Christmas shopping. I'm like, okay, well, I'll use this opportunity to play some video games. So I turned it on, 2 minutes in, power source burns out. I'm like, well, crap. Sat the controller down on the couch next to me, and I'm like, well, I'll wrap presents then. We ordered another one. It wasn't going to be there for a week. So go through about a week, and the new power box comes in the mail. I'm like, okay, well, I'll put it in, and now I'll get to play the new game I got. So I went to go find my controller, which I had sat down on the couch next to me, and it wasn't there.
Huh.
I looked all through the couch. We tore all the cushions off the couch, looked behind it, looked under it, looked under the chair, asked my son if he had taken it. He hadn't seen it. Um, I looked behind the TV, in all the cabinets. It was just gone from existence. I actually went out and bought another controller. And so a week or so after that, I'm upstairs getting ready to leave my bedroom, and something catches my eye on the ground. I think it was like a quarter or something like that. But I looked down, and it was right next to the shelf that we don't use the shelf for anything. It's an old TV stand that we just haven't gotten rid of. I think we set like a fan on top of it. But on the bottom of the shelf was sitting my Xbox controller that I had lost.
Yeah.
And it would have never went upstairs for any reason. Like I said, I sat the thing on the couch right next to me after after the Xbox broke. So
Yeah. There's a book by investigator Mary Rose Barrington called Jot or Just One of Those Things, which is explored in the Hidden Folk. So this is again where I'm drawing that from. But these things when they are jottled, so to speak, they just disappear and then return randomly, and it's like this is attested to in Fey lore, and it's Patrick Harper calls it pixelation, as in pixies, um, and so yeah, it's certainly a thing. Again, that's one of the things which I keep saying. It is certainly a thing, but
yeah,
it is certainly a thing, and so it's like I don't know. I think Barrington says something about a rift in the fabric of causality, whatever that might mean.
hmm,
Um, I've got no clue what on earth that means, but it's like it it is mildly irritating in these sorts of fields when people use kind of quantum physics in the context of just saying it's pixie dust,
yeah,
as in just like so what is this? I've got no idea what it is, therefore it must be quantum physics. It must be a rift in the time frame of causality. Who knows? But yes, but like so both Paul both uh Patrick Harper and Mary, I just forgot her name, Mary Rose Barrington have talked about that, and that definitely seems to be, you guessed it, a thing that happens.
hmm,
Um and so yes, I are we going to leave it there?
yeah. I suppose so. Um,
Yeah.
I
Well,
really appreciate you talking to me and give me an outlet to talk about ghosts. The paranormal and high strangeness and cryptids are it's one of my greatest interests, but I find like a lot of people just don't really like to talk about it. So,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, certainly.
so I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
This has
you
been
too.
great. Yeah, this has actually been the first. As I mentioned in the start of the episode, this is the first time I've hosted one of these episodes on my own, and
It went fantastic.
yeah, yeah, it went great. So thank you so much, and yeah, I will use some of the ghost box footage, audio to play us out, and so long. This has been excellent. I shall be in contact.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, we are close by the H.H. Holmes house. We're in the vicinity of a place where H.H. Holmes murdered a boy. We're going to attempt contact. We're not far from where we were just now. We're like, literally like a quarter of a mile, an eighth of a mile probably even away from that spot. But we're going to try 2 more rounds and then go home so we both have to pee. Bad.
All right, here we go.
Okay, Jordan's on FM. Are there any spirits close by with good intentions that want to communicate?
Hardly. You can take us.
Us.
Whatever, you're finding nothing.
How many of you are there? Who's there? Anyone there?
This is what I feel having ventured. Have you?
My name is Paige. This is my husband, Jordan. We come with good intentions. We just want to talk.
Pressing me.
Can you speak with us? Do you want to speak with us?
But you could have been driving, not conversation.
Who am I speaking to? Am I speaking to anyone?
Come on down. Rest with me.
Oh, I don't think so.
I am. Oh, God.
What?
That was just a scream.
Okay, do you want to stop? Hey, do you want to
Yep.
stop? Okay.
That one's done.